This episode of the Helping Healing Humor podcast is brought to you in partnership with ministryleague.com. We would love for more people to discover this show, so please rate and review us on iTunes or your podcast provider. Feel free to share on your social media and subscribe at benandtravis.com for the free ebook, 28 Days of Focused Living.
Welcome back into the Helping Healing Humor podcast with Ben and Travis. We obviously enjoyed part one of our interview with John Williams from lifethatcounts.org. We're back with Ben and Will. How are you guys doing?
Doing great.
Yeah, doing good, man. Excited for all the things that John said in the first part. Can't wait to hear everything that he's going to add to this one as well.
John, thank you so much for being with us again. Hope you're doing well. So we're going to jump right back in. You had a great amount of knowledge, a lot of enthusiasm that you shared with us in the first interview. You talked about how we need to have, that conversation with people about Jesus, that there are so many opportunities out there to be able to tell the truth about God and to do it in a loving way. Obviously there's some things that you touched on in our first interview that kind of have led you, and obviously we believe ultimately that God, the Spirit of God, has guided us, if we're open to his calling, to things in our life. And obviously when that thing or that activity is helping people, we certainly can see God in that. But can you talk to us a little bit about how God has shown up in leading you to this lot in life that you have?
We live in a society, in a culture today where more than ever, we don't really need to be led by our emotions. We need to be rooted and we need to be grounded in our convictions. Again, from love, not from dogmatism, not by judgmentalism, not by looking at the other and pointing out their flaws, but looking at the other and us both trying to figure out how to point toward a loving Savior that died for me on my cross for my sins. So this is why I would encourage us all. Make sure you're socially active. Yes, if you're of the household of faith, yes, you're a pilgrim passing through, and heaven is our home, and that's so true. At the same time, we live here for a while. And while you're here, make sure you're doing those things that you need to do. Make sure you're getting out and you're voting. Make sure you're advocating for things that you feel to be true, that you feel to be right, that you feel belong in the world. We need to quit balking at the opportunities that are in front of us, and we need to start knocking them out of the park. We need to start standing up for what's true and what's firm. And while we're on this, and I'm gonna take this opportunity to just share something. A year ago in Alabama, we were conducting what's called a national impact study. We were testing a new innovative approach in peer mentoring using a curriculum that we call Relentless. And Donna Golub, who's the executive director of PATH, a positive approach to teen health. Donna has been a wonderful friend and a mentor to me, and I believe Donna to be a godly woman. She's definitely been there with me in the trenches and through the fire of some of this stuff. And Donna came up with the name Relentless. Their organization's the lead on this project. We were a participating organization here serving in Alabama. And one of our so when we do these programs in schools, these federally funded programs, they come with them what's called a pre and a post survey. And these surveys allow us to collect data from students to see whether or not our implementation method is having any positive or adverse, healthy or unhealthy effects on our kids. Because after all, the first rule of any relationship is to do no harm. So when we come in and we bring programs, we most definitely want to make sure that we're doing no harm. Simultaneously, we want to make sure that we're being good stewards of the federal funds to which we've been entrusted, so that we can deliver programs and implementation methods that do bring about measurable quantifiable change in the lives of the adolescent student participants, which are participating in our programs on campus. Some of the questions in the high school, guys, this is 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade. Some of the questions in our high school survey ask kids around their opinions, behaviors, or intentions around different sexual activities. Oral sex, vaginal sex, how far is too far, things like that. Alcohol, tobacco, other drugs, bullying, whether or not you have a supportive home environment, things like that. In one of our schools, we had a mom decide to call Rick and Bubba and got through. And the mom, her daughter had come home from the school, and the daughter was asking the mom a question from the survey. The daughter had asked the mom, what is oral sex? And a high school kid, guys, a high school kid today with one of these was asking their parent what oral sex is. That's a win in anybody's book. That's a win. Well, the mom I believe the mom absolutely had the best intentions in mind when she called Rick and Bubba, but she absolutely tore me apart, called me by name. She tore our organization apart. They blasted the idea. They went on for about 10 minutes on this stuff. And if that mom ever listens to this, or if Rick and Bubba ever listens to this, I want to use this as an opportunity to say to you guys, Mom, I commend you. And if more moms like you, see, you don't know this, but Mom, you were like my mom. I became sexually active as a 14-year-old. And for me, it was an emptiness and a loneliness that I felt inside. When you don't have your biological father in your life, there's a lot missing there, and you're looking for love in all the wrong places, to quote the country music song from who knows where. But I remember the day I went home and I told my mom, I broke the relationship off, and I went home and I told my mom what I had done and what I'd been doing. And my mom held me in her arms for what felt like hours. So, Mom, I want you to know that I commend you, and I'm thankful for moms like you who are that invested in the lives of your kids. And I think it's beautiful how your daughter was able to come and have that conversation with you. So I founded Life That Counts because I believe that if I can make it, others can too. I come from as we talked about earlier, a pretty kind of a jacked up situation. My mom was, we lived with extended family. We lived with my grandmom, uncle, a couple of aunts, a cousin, up until I was 9 years old. Now, if you guys remember the Persian Gulf War, my mom worked at MCO in Glencoe, Alabama, where she set the pin in grenades. She would work double and triple shifts at work to try to make ends meet. When I was 9, there was a day where we had as I mentioned earlier, my uncle was about the worst kind of an alcoholic. He was a terrorist in our home, and it was daily. It wasn't just every once in a while. It was all the time. And it was in the summer, and my uncle had become physically violent with my kid brother. And it resulted in my kid brother having to go to the emergency room. And that day, my mom moved us out of living with my grandparents and moved us into government projects. We lived in the Emma Sanson projects in Gadsden, Alabama. And from then on, my mom would work hard, and eventually my stepdad came into my life. Probably the only man on the planet who can put up with my, shall we say, stubborn mother. But I had some folks in my life early on, kind of like you did, Travis. There was my best friend's parents, Steve and Nancy Stewart. Bo was a buddy of mine in middle school, and I watched Steve love Nancy. Steve was one of our basketball coaches, but he was more than that. I watched him love his wife. I practically lived with them during the second part of 8th grade and most all of high school. I'd go on family vacations with them. I'd wear Steve's clothes. I'd eat the ravioli, stuff like that. And they demonstrated what healthy family looked like. And I got to see Steve love his wife so well. And I got to see Nancy love Steve well. I got to see them serve one another, not in male chauvinism, not in egalitarian feminism, but in loving, serving complementarianism, just complement the gifts of and the strengths of each other. They loved Bo. They cared for Bo. They loved me. They cared for me. They took me in as just almost their own. It was almost an unofficial adoption some months. I went to Camp Booth in Green Pond, Alabama. And I think that's where I fell in love with Jesus. I think that's where I fell in love with God. That's where God met me. Couldn't wait to go there each summer. And after high school, I had no idea what I was going to do with my life. There was no one in my life there was no particular apprenticeship with the family that I could do. There was absolutely no path or no direction whatsoever. When I was 19 years old, I just got fired from pushing a broom at a place called Crown Column and Millwork. It was a dusty old warehouse that made architectural columns. And if you're late 3 times in the first 30 days, they fire you. And the start time was 6 a.m. I'd never seen 6 a.m. before I started going to work there. So anyway, and then so there's this one day I got fired. The same day, I get home, I check the mail, and thank you, Gadsden State, for letting me know that I was now on academic probation and that I could not come back to school that semester. And I sat in the kitchen of my mom and stepdad's. We lived in a double wide trailer out in the North Gadsden community in Gadsden, Alabama. And I sat there and contemplated taking my own life. And, down the hall to the right was my mom and my stepdad's bedroom. And, he liked to hunt and stuff. And I knew where his guns were and I knew where the ammo boxes were. And then over off of the end of my left shoe was, I don't want to paint this to be magical or fanciful or anything like that, but the sun was just shining through, and one of those little diamond shaped windows in the door. And I just kind of felt something inside me say, John, you're either going to get busy dying, or you're going to get busy living. And in an instant, I got up and I decided I was going to get busy living. Long story short, I ended up going back to work, driving a forklift and pushing a broom in the same dusty old warehouse. I ended up going back to Gadsden State. I finished an associate's there. It took a little longer than one would like, but I did. And I felt that God was calling me into ministry, into the service of others. That's what ministry means. It means the service of others. My understanding of that at that time was, I needed to go and work at churches. And so, if you take a young man who isn't sure of himself, and even more so isn't sure of his Savior, and if you take a person who needs the opinions and the approval of others to fuel him, and you put him in that setting, that can be very unhealthy for him. And that's exactly what it was for me. I needed to be needed. I needed to be liked. I needed the approval rating, right? And for me, that was very unhealthy. I became an awful father in the process. I was trying to take care of everyone else and not my own kids. I became an awful husband in the process. I was always there for others. I was never there for my wife. I would do things like sacrifice potential income. I would work crazy late hours. I had absolutely no boundaries that I would set with my work and with my family. That was just a blur, and we pride ourselves in some of these things at times because, we say that, hey, we always do this stuff as a family. Well, you may be doing it in the same space, but the heart of your wife and the heart of your kids may not be in it. And you need to know whether or not the heart of your wife and the heart of your kids are in these things. So anyway, over a course of time, I knew that God was calling me to serve youth, and I was working and serving in West Tennessee. We would do these big events, and we'd have a lot of kids come. It was like lights, camera, action, Jesus. And what I ended up learning through that process is it was lights, camera, action, ego, and it was my ego. And, a lot of kids come into church. I mean, there's just, bottom line, guys, there's just not a lot to do in Dyersburg, Tennessee. And we were the biggest thing in town, and it was cool to be a part of what we were doing.
I think,
but
speaking
anyway,
to your kids and your family, I remember being, coming out of Freed-Hardeman, I had a piece of paper that said I was a graduate.
Right.
So I was going to fix the world, man. I had all the plans, all the strategies, man. I was smart, super smart. The problem is I was living from my own strength, and I got burned out. Wow. Who saw that coming? Everybody saw that coming. Anybody who's done ministry very long, you're living from your own strength. It's got to be the Spirit of God. It's got to be His Spirit that indwells you, that leads you, that strengthens you. And, to have the family that I have now that is my wife is like only a billion times more compassionate than me. She sees things where people need help and where my ego gets in the way. I enjoy being up in front. I like preaching. I like teaching. I like doing this podcast. But, you can do all those things, but if you're not really, like you said, ministry, but serving others, you're out there, then you're missing the whole thing. If you're not promoting, that they would see your good works and not glorify me, but glorify Him. And that's really what this podcast is about, is people like what you said. And I appreciate your testimony there about the hardships that you faced, and, keep going, keep whatever it takes. Man, you had something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm curious to know sort of how we know your worldview, at least what window you've kind of allowed us into with this. We kind of see that, but we also see you going into schools, and I assume they're not private schools, they're public schools on many occasions. You're going into those scenarios. So what is it, maybe what's a message that you're giving to these kids other than a few of the things that you've kind of led us into? Because obviously, like we've talked about, sometimes it's hard in those scenarios and those settings to say Jesus is the answer. How are you sort of able to point people in that direction? What are you able to say to people? What do you try to say to these teenagers? I know I've listened to a couple of your talks, and you've just talked about the idea of you're enough and things like that, but kind of give us a window into what you share with these kids when you go in and do these programs with them.
Yeah, man. If you remember, it was Paul in Galatians who said it's the law that serves as a schoolmaster that leads me to Christ.
Right.
And so when we learn how to treat one another, and when we have that, so when we move from unconscious, incompetence into conscious incompetence, the lights go off for us. Why did I do that? And then with practice over time, we can move from conscious incompetence into conscious competence. And as we continue to practice these things over the years and over time, then I've always done things that way. Well, not really. There was a growth period, but it becomes unconscious competence, yeah. Right? So when my wife says in the middle of the night or whenever we lay down, when she's like, it's hot in here, I unconsciously know, get up, turn the fan on.
Yes.
You know, we don't have to have a conversation about that. I know what to do. So the turn for me, and in the Life That Counts, and even in with the messaging, it was in Dyersburg where a couple of things began to come together for us in our youth group. And for years, I'd experimented with this idea of, so we've had small groups forever, right? And it's always small groups, and it's adult-led small groups. And I'm like, this guy's 55 years old. I mean, this is a nice concept that he's going to get along with these high school guys. And in some cases, it's fantastic, but not in all cases. And what we discovered is that when we would pour a little bit of intentionality, when we would empower 10th, 11th grade, 12th grade students, and they would lead groups of 7th graders, 8th graders, 9th graders, 6th graders, stuff like that. When those older kids would lead those younger groups, dude, youth group became the coolest thing around. Youth group became amazing. Kids, I won't say they worship the ground that older kids walk on, but they almost do. They really do. If you have a 9th grader or a 10th grader at a school, and that they look up to the older kids. I've seen this in my own home. I've seen this in schools that we've worked with. So what we did when I was working there, when I was serving in student ministry, we were experimenting with this concept of student leaders. And we didn't really know what to call them, because we didn't want to call kids leaders, because for some kids that term goes to their head, and they can't fit through the front door anymore because their head's so swelled up. So we were always batting the terms around, but I began working with this. It was a federally funded program in West Tennessee. It was under the same kind of funding agency, but this one was the Office for Justice and Juvenile Delinquency Prevention. And it was on a project for peer-to-peer mentoring, utilizing a concept called positive youth development. And not to get into in all the weeds of that, but the big idea is if we can train upperclassmen to serve as peer mentors, or the word that I like the most now is guides, because a guide can show you the way. A guide has been there before. They don't have all the answers, but they've been there before, and they know how to navigate the environment that you're currently in. That's what a guide does. And that's what a junior and a senior can do for a 9th or a 10th grader. They've been there. They've navigated the terrain. They know, hey, with this teacher, you can joke around. With this teacher, you need to tighten up a little bit. Hey, be careful about your relationships in 9th grade, because they may come back to bite you when you're a junior. It's kind of like, hey, tread easy here. So they can provide those things. So we really begin to tap into that and do this in schools there in West Tennessee. And dude, it was absolutely phenomenal. I mean, words came to mind like revival. And what was happening is every night of the week, I would get messages from kids in the 7 or 8 schools that we were serving there in West Tennessee, get messages from students in our group who it was either something awful or something amazing. A kid had just been beat again, or a young lady had just been attacked again, or her boyfriend just pressured himself onto her again, or dad and mom finally made up and they're going out to family dinner to celebrate just the fact that they enjoy one another again. Right. So there were opportunities for celebration, and there were opportunities for intervention, but it was all through upperclassmen who were being extremely intentional with their influence. And remember John Maxwell on what is leadership. Leadership is never anything more or anything less than influence. So when we can help, when we can help facilitate environments where upperclassmen can be intentional with their influence, and we all have influence, when we can help facilitate those environments, then what we see is we empower things like compassion. We empower things like kindness. We empower things like acceptance. And we do this in a way that's at scale. Whether it be a new technology, whether it be a concept or an innovation, how do we take it to scale where it can sustain, mass on its own, right? Where it can become self-sustainable. So we do have a method by which we go into schools. There is a target number of the audience on campus that we're aiming for to recruit kids to be a part of programs. We go after a specific grade level. For that grade level, we recruit X number of students to serve as peer mentors for that grade level. And by the time you get those folks invested on board, you've got more than 30% of the high school campus or a school campus on board. So when you have 30% of any community pulling in the same direction, good things are going to happen, or healthy things or unhealthy things, as we've seen in recent months, will happen as well. So when we come in, and so compassion is an idea. So if we want to spread an idea of compassion, or if we want to spread an idea of hope, or if we want to spread an idea of, hey, you're enough. And I will say things like, you're wonderfully and beautifully made. You're fearfully made. Like, there's greatness inside of you. You don't even know it yet. When we help our kids understand those things, then that begins to create a vulnerable, authentic environment where our kids can come together and they can share with one another.
If we needed to know how to point people that direction, what would we tell them as far as pointing them to your stuff and how to get in contact with you and that sort of thing?
Well, you can find all of our information, all of our contacts and stuff on lifethatcounts.org. And I would encourage you that if you're a school decision maker or an educator, or if you're close to a school decision maker or an educator, or if you're in an environment where maybe you're a parent and you feel like your child's campus maybe could be a little more receptive, not only maybe to your own kids, but as a whole, then it's really, it really starts with how we engage our upperclassmen and going after the whole person, if you will. So, a big part of what we do is whole person health, and in engaging those social emotional things and making room for that.
You got 2 kids, so I'm going to go off the cuff here and just pray that you've got an answer to this question. Okay.
All right.
We need your absolute best dad joke.
I don't know where my 14-year-old comes up with these things, but I don't know if this is a dad joke per se, but this is something that I got from him. And the Lord and God said, "Come forth and you shall receive eternal life." But I came fifth and got a toaster.
John, we appreciate you being with us. We appreciate your message. We appreciate what you're doing. You just keep on trucking, man. And if there's any way that we can assist you, we would love nothing more than to do just that.
Guys, it's a pleasure to be on today. This was fun. I hope there's something in here that you can use.
It's been a good discussion. Thank you so much for your time and just sharing it with us today.
My pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, Travis, what is the largest bone in the body?
That's the femur, that long bone that goes from your hip socket and connects to your knee.
So let's say that you fell and broke your femur. Do you fix it yourself?
I mean, if you're Batman, but those of us in the real world would go to a specialist to help set that bone back into place and begin that healing process.
Well, now what if your emotions get broken? What should you do? Do you fix it yourself, or might it be helpful for you to go and talk to a counselor who can help you get things straightened out?
I think you're talking about our sponsors at Serenity Counseling in Florence, Alabama, who offer help and healing and even a dose of humor to assist their clients every day.
Yeah, the ladies at Serenity Counseling, Becky, Amy, Monica, and Karen, they offer all sorts of different kinds of therapy, from your talk therapy that we're used to play therapy for children, even EMDR, or eye movement desensitization and reprocessing for those who have gone through traumatic events, and then even equine assisted psychotherapy.
Wait a minute, Ben. There's a lot of big words that you just said. That last one, assisted therapy, what is all that about?
Equine assisted therapy, Travis. Equine means horses. They use horses for therapy. Yes, horses are included and present during some of their outdoor sessions. Approaching horses helps us reflect on how we approach our relationships and how we can face other big and overwhelming things in our lives.
Ben, that sounds like God showing up and showing out in his creation. Check out the link to their website in our show notes. If you've ever wondered if a counselor might be the answer to what you're struggling with, give them a call. Serenity Counseling, where hope is given and healing begins.
Serenity Counseling is located at 1954 Jackson Road in Florence, Alabama, and they can be reached at 256-263-6367, serenitycounselingshoals.org. Thanks for being with us for this episode of the Helping Healing Humor podcast. Be sure to download our free ebook, 28 Days of Focused Living, at benandtravis.com and receive all of our Helping Healing and Humor extra content directly in your inbox. We look forward to having you join us at the same Ben and Travis time, same Ben and Travis channel.